What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatoito Boxing Show, and we are fresh off, just a few days removed from Christian Mbilli's victory over Sergiy Derevyanchenko. I would love to hear from you guys as far as what your take is on Christian Mbilli and his performance over Derevyanchenko. A lot to dive into here, and it's a division that obviously it's dominated right now by one Saul Canelo Alvarez, who still sits atop with all the titles in line. I believe, as of recent reports, the IBF may be looking to remove that title from Canelo Alvarez and keep it in play. But I'm not positive on that. I just recall reading something on it. Nonetheless, Canelo sits atop the throne right now of the super-middleweight, and everybody else is lining themselves up. Two big players in that division have since departed. They got tired of waiting, one being the Mexican monster David Benavidez. He is now taking his talents to 175. Successful debut for him against Vosdik just earlier this year, and is now in line to face the winner of Bivol and Beterbiev when they have their big undisputed showdown come October. The second big player that departed 168 was Cuban fighter David Morrell. He also debuted recently. He was on the undercard of that Crawford-Madrimov event that took place not long ago, and he was also successful in his debut at 175. Also got tired of not being able to secure a Caleb Plant fight, a Berlanga fight, a Benavidez fight, or a Canelo fight, even though he held a minority title of the WBA or the main WBA world title that was knocking on the door of Canelo. But because he's such a newer fighter with a young record, there was nothing marketable there, and Canelo wasn't even looking his way. And then Canelo ignored Benavidez. And now Berlanga just got the shot of a lifetime. But the division, nonetheless, has a lot of players that are starting to line themselves up, and we see this happen every so often. Every time a division gets dominated by one fighter, you have all the up and coming fighters or everybody else that's starting to build up to that title contention. And they start knocking on the door of the champion. Eventually, somebody breaks through and knocks the champion over. And that's when we have these big highlights or these big historic moments within the sport of boxing. As of now, Canelo has a stranglehold of this super middleweight division. And remember, Canelo is on the back end of his career already. So he's doing the big mega fights. And although people are starting to line up Christian Mbilli as if he's the next one to challenge Canelo, everybody trying to vie their way for Canelo sweepstakes, or as Canelo says, the payday. I don't see Christian Mbilli being the next opponent for him. He's tailor-made for Canelo. This is another Munguia 2.0. I believe Munguia, since recent reports, De La Hoya said that it was just a co-promotional pact that Golden Boy and Top Rank are going to have. So Munguia is highlighted on ESPN. But the way that everything is looking as far as Jaime Munguia is that Jaime Munguia has departed Golden Boy, got the biggest shot of his career by getting a shot at Canelo earlier this year. And there's nothing else that Golden Boy can do for him since they already got him to the pinnacle. Munguia came up short. Now he's going over to Top Rank. And there's more opposition there for him. Christian Mbilli being one of them. So Christian Mbilli headlined this past Saturday against veteran Sergiy Derevyanchenko. And he was successful. He comes away with the decision. He gets the nod by the judges. But there's a lot to take away from this fight. And a lot that occurred during the fight. And I'm curious to hear about you guys, or from you guys, to see, and gals, to see what you guys think. Is Christian Mbilli really the next big thing in boxing? Jaime Munguia is going to be debuting 1 week for Top Rank. He's going to be debuting for Top Rank and ESPN on a Friday night, 1 week after Canelo fights Berlanga. This is how much movement there is within the super middleweights. You have, Golden Boy has his young fighter named Darius Fulgham, who they're pushing on somewhat of a fast track, coming off a victory over Alantes Fox not long ago. Undefeated young fighter. Golden Boy also has the bully, Bektemir Melikuziev, who was supposed to be fighting Sergiy Derevyanchenko, and those talks fell through. Derevyanchenko since ends up landing in Mbilli. Two people who I actually had a chance to talk to not long ago. You could go check those interviews out on the YouTube channel in case you haven't, because they're still relevant. Sergiy Derevyanchenko, when I ran into him, he was asking for Mbilli, he was asking for Diego Pacheco, maybe to run it back with Jaime Munguia, a Munguia Derevyanchenko 2, or even a Canelo. But this is an older fighter. I believe he's 38 years old, 37, 38 years old. And we saw some of that present itself in this fight with Derevyanchenko. Well, out of all those fighters, he was on the undercard of Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, when he beat Von Alexander. And on that same night, Bektemir ended up beating Pierre Dibombe. And those two, with those two victories, were supposed to be next in line to face one another. The talks fell through. Derevyanchenko ends up landing in Mbilli, just like he mentioned to me on the interview. That's one of the people he wanted. And he got it. Bektemir still inactive. He was supposed to be on the undercard of the Virgil Ortiz showdown with Boachuk, and it didn't happen. We didn't see him on that card. Why? I don't know. I haven't seen any reports or any fights signed for him for a later date. Nothing announced yet for the bully. So he's still on the sidelines. But he's a big player in the 168 division. You have Demetrius Andrade, who no one has seen him. We barely saw him in the middleweights when he was a champ there. Very inactive. Debuts at 168. Gets railed by Benavides, and that's it. We haven't heard from him. Somebody else that we just mentioned here that Derevyanchenko mentioned on the interview was Diego Pacheco. And he's going to be fighting at the end of the month out in LA against Maciej Sulecki. Very experienced Sulecki, who's been in the ring with Charlo, who was supposed to be in the ring with Munguia. He's been in the ring with some top dogs. I think he was in the ring with Munguia. I'll have to double check on that. But he's a decorated veteran, similar to Sergiy Derevyanchenko, who could give anybody a hard time on any given night. And that's going to be a really tough test for Diego Pacheco, who's starting to establish himself as a big dog in the 168 division. So a lot of movement. And we just mentioned Canelo Berlanga, and on that same undercard, you have Caleb Plant, a former foe of Canelo Alvarez, former victim of Canelo Alvarez, who will be fighting Trevor McCumbee on that undercard of Berlanga Canelo, trying to get himself back into title contention, as is Munguia, who will be fighting a week after, debuting for Top Rank against a Canadian, or a fighter who is based out of Canada now, Eric Bazinian, who's a hard-hitting, undefeated fighter, and it should turn out to be a fairly entertaining fight between him and Munguia. So these are all the super middleweights right now that are making noise, that are aligning themselves for the Canelo sweepstakes. And Mbilli seems to be leading the way as far as commentators. And we go into this fight, and he is just pedal to the metal. And that's what makes Mbilli fights fun. And that's what's attracting a lot of attention to him. That he is just pedal to the metal. He is just like on 4 scoops of pre-workout. He just goes in and takes the fight to his opponents from the opening bell and just starts throwing power after power after power shot. He did so with Derevyanchenko. It took Derevyanchenko a couple rounds to start weathering the storm. But Derevyanchenko started finding a lot of success. There was a lot of holes that we ended up seeing from Mbilli because he's so used to knocking his opposition out. And he's been fighting subpar opposition. This by far was the biggest test of his career. And he passed it. Let's give the spoiler. Mbilli won. Those of you who were a few days removed, if you didn't watch the fight or haven't read any articles, Mbilli won. Christian Mbilli got the decision against Sergiy Derevyanchenko. But here is the things that we need to break down. A lot of holes. When he throws those power punches, he leaves himself completely open and exposed and vulnerable to attacks down center, which Derevyanchenko exposed. Derevyanchenko caught him multiple times with uppercuts, multiple times down center range. And here is the caveat. Sergiy Derevyanchenko, by the end of the third round, they start noticing that there's issues with him. They couldn't narrow it down. And amidst the fourth round taking place, he begins to fight with one hand. His left bicep tears. And you see the bicep rolled fairly high on his arm, and he becomes a one-handed fighter. He starts surviving, and Mbilli hadn't caught on to the point that to the fact that Derevyanchenko was a one-arm fighter. And Derevyanchenko started peppering Mbilli with that jab. One-arm onslaught from Derevyanchenko, and he held his own throughout the fight. You hear the commentators calling for the fight to be stopped in the middle rounds because Derevyanchenko was incurring a lot of damage. But he's a veteran who's been in the ring with Munguia, with Danny Jacobs, with Gennady Golovkin, and many felt that he should, with Jermall Charlo. And out of all those losses, many were controversial. Remember, when he fought Gennady Golovkin, many felt that that was the night that Gennady got a gift, that Derevyanchenko had done enough to have beat him. Gennady got the nod. When he fought Danny Jacobs, same thing. Many felt that Derevyanchenko deserved the decision. Danny Jacobs got the win. When he was on that fight of the year showdown with Jaime Munguia, which makes Jaime Munguia fight so fun, many felt that Derevyanchenko had done enough to have handed the loss, the first loss of Munguia's career to him. Munguia ends up dropping Derevyanchenko in the final round, which played to his favor and edged out the victory for Munguia on that night on the scorecards. And now he was a one-arm fighter. And the reason I brought up his age earlier in this episode is because he's battle-tested. He's a veteran. He's older. His body is starting to break down, and a lot of it has to do with the accumulation of wear and tear because of his lengthy career. The former Ukrainian Olympian is still holding his own, and he is such a veteran and such a pro that he refused to be taken out. He has never been stopped. And this, it's almost as if he had so much heart, so much pride, that the corner throwing in the towel, Andrew Rozier, his trainer, if they would have thrown in the towel, it would look as a TKO stoppage on his record. He had so much heart, so much conviction, that he does not want that on his record and refused to take a knee or to bow out. Imagine his bicep, the pain that it must have been in. And we still don't know if it's a matter of wear and tear on his arm, something that happened during sparring, a lingering injury, or if it's something that occurred during the fight. There was on a couple occasions early in the fight, I believe in the second round, where I caught on to, and it's just a matter of positioning. When they're feigning one another, it looked like Mbilli's elbow was landing on his bicep, at least a couple times that I caught on the replays. Like his elbow just lands right smack center on the bicep. Who knows if that could have been it? Not likely. Looks more than like a lingering injury. But whatever it was, Mbilli's bicep tears on him. He's a one-handed fighter, fighting for survival, refusing to be stopped, refusing to have that blemish on his record, as far as a TKO or a knockout type stoppage, and makes it all the way to the end. In the 7th round, there was an interesting exchange between them where Mbilli finds himself off balance because he's throwing just full-on home run hitters for punches, trying to eliminate Derevyanchenko completely wide-footed, throwing these wide-rangy punches, and Mbilli ducks under a punch, catches him as Mbili's off balance, catches him on the stomach. Nice body shot by Derevyanchenko, where it ends up in turn hurting Mbilli. And Derevyanchenko comes back to round out and starts landing more punches with his right hand, with this functioning hand, and hurts Mbilli. Mbilli was visibly injured, or at least shaken, and Derevyanchenko's laying the damage onto him. Mbilli closes the round well, and fights well, recovers, and finishes off the entirety of the fight looking well. His legs didn't betray him, his chin didn't betray him, but he was hurt, which you have to give credit to Derevyanchenko and his accuracy, his efficiency, his heart, his spirit to not quit and still inflict damage on the opponent, even though he was a limited fighter due to his injury. And to Mbilli, this has to be the toughest test of his career to date. And he did pass it because he gets the W. There's a lot for him to learn from this victory. But there's a lot that we ended up witnessing as fans. You've taken out in quick succession, Mbilli has taken out lesser opposition, less experienced, fighters in his early days, and in his recent fights, because of his power and his onslaught, he has a very smothering type of attack where he's constantly on you, constantly walking forward, constantly walking you down. But for an experienced counterpuncher, he's the dream opponent. If he fights CANELO, he's tailor-made for that style. If he fights Munguia, it will be a fight of the year because they're both very similar, in which they come forward, they expose themselves, and they constantly play that gambit and try to land that big punch, risking it all, which makes it for a fan-friendly style. It's an action-packed style that Mbilli has. And yes, if he fights Munguia, it'll be a fan-friendly fight, an action-packed fight, because they have very similar styles, at least a lot of similarities between them. This was the case this past Saturday night, that the fight was so intriguing and so interesting because we're seeing one fighter limited because of the injury he suffers during the ring or amidst the fight, during the fight, unwilling to quit, unwilling to pull the plug on himself. Still take the fight to a fighter in his full capacities who had leverage and momentum on his side in Mbilli, and he was still unable to stop Derevyanchenko and get him out of there. To just completely dominate him and get him out of there. You had an injured fighter, and he couldn't figure out how to close the show. That, plus the fact that he was getting peppered and still got hurt, similar to that 7th round exchange that I just mentioned. And there were other exchanges down the final stretch where Derevyanchenko was still finding his target and was still having success against Mbilli. And Mbilli continued to land everything in his arsenal with a very good mixture of body shots and headshots. All power the entire night, as we're accustomed to seeing of Mbilli, and he was unable to eliminate an injured, limited fighter, as was the case with Derevyanchenko. And that's where the questions lie. Is he ready for CANELO? No. Let's be honest. But neither is Berlanga. Can Mbilli beat Berlanga? Absolutely. I don't think Mbilli beats a Caleb Plant. The test that Munguia has with Bazinian, who's a fellow Canadian, and I say fellow because although Mbilli is originally from Cameroon, born in Cameroon, raised in France, and is currently training and fighting out of Canada. And that's why I say fellow fighter in Bazinian, because Bazinian is also currently training and fighting out of Canada. I believe he's Armenian, if I'm correct. Bazinian. I'll double check here. But that would be a fight. And the Munguia fight is very interesting because we want to see how he bounces back from the defeat that he suffered earlier, his first defeat of his career at the hands of CANELO, made it all the way to the top like he wanted to, and came up short. How's he going to bounce back? 1. 2, Jaime Munguia has departed from Freddie Roach and has returned with Eric Morales, which means defense might be a big question again. Although Eric Morales did everything possible to fix those holes, we saw a slightly different Jaime Munguia under Freddie Roach with John Ryder earlier this year. But defense seems to be the one thing that continuously plagues Munguia, although he's doing a lot better, and he has gotten a lot better in the last few fights. From Eric Morales to Freddie Roach, now he has returned with Eric Morales. So we'll see what version of Jaime Munguia we see this coming September, how he bounces back from that defeat at the hands of CANELO, and how he looks against somebody who's starting to knock on the door of title contention himself in Eric Bazinian, who's an undefeated fighter and a heavy puncher himself. That's going to be a tough fight for him. Eric Bazinian is a 32-0-1 fighter, has 1 draw, 23 knockouts to his credit of the 32 wins. And he's Armenian, originally from Armenia, based and trains out of Canada. If Munguia beats Bazinian, I believe we will see Munguia and Mbilli. Mbilli beating Munguia would definitely get him closer to a CANELO shot. If Bazinian beats Munguia, Munguia will still be a draw because he has a big Hispanic base in the U.S. and a big Mexican following overall, and he puts butts in seats. So for Munguia, if he loses to Bazinian, that'll be the second defeat of his career, but he could still get himself into a Demetrius Andrade fight, which never had happened at 160 if Andrade ever returns to the ring. Munguia could still get himself into a showdown with Golden Boy's bully, Bektemir Melikuziev. That would be a fan-friendly fight. He could still get a rematch with Derevyanchenko, as Derevyanchenko probably has maybe a couple fights left in his career. He's definitely on the back end of his career. Munguia could probably have a showdown with a Diego Pacheco or a Maciej Sulecki. Whoever wins that fight. And I'm looking at Munguia's record here, and he was supposed to fight Maciej Sulecki a few years back, but that fight never happened. And I think that's when he ended up fighting Demetrius Ballard, if my memory doesn't fail me, who was a last minute standing because of Maciej Sulecki suffering a last-minute injury or something of that sort. So that would be a fight to revisit if Munguia is not successful against Bazinian, and then we would see an Mbilli-Bazinian showdown, which would be two undefeated, heavy-handed punchers, and it would be a big sellout for Canada, for the Canadian boxing market. But if Munguia does defeat Bazinian, you could bet that this is probably the route that we're going to see next, Mbilli-Munguia. A lot of interesting landscape here as it's laying out, or a lot of interesting moves happening within the boxing landscape at 168, because the Pacheco-Sulecki fight, very interesting in as far as both of those opponents, because Sulecki could very well defeat Pacheco and be the toughest test for him, and is going to be the toughest test for Pacheco's young career. But Pacheco is such a tall fighter, rangy fighter. He should be able to pick apart the older Sulecki and start guiding himself towards a big showdown. Don't be surprised. I would like to see Bully against Pacheco, or the winner of Pacheco-Sulecki. But Bully against Mbilli would be another great fight. And I think Munguia, if he's successful with Bazinian, yes, they're probably going to try to make the Mbilli fight, but I think Munguia has his eyes set on Caleb Plant. So we have a lot to look for there between Caleb Plant and Trevor McCumbee on the undercard of Canelo Berlanga. Munguia could also face off against Berlanga down the line, and that would be a marketable fight as well. For Mbilli, he's in a tough position right now because although he just got the nod, he's undefeated, he's a big power puncher. A lot of people are just jumping on that bandwagon that Mbilli should be next in for Canelo. I just don't see it happening. And on this very same undercard of the Mbilli Derevyanchenko, you had Osleis Iglesias, who was the last IBO champ. I'm not sure if he's still the current IBO champ because neither fighter made weight. They were both above the 168 limit, both Osleis and his counterpart. Let me see if I bring him up here again. He ended up fighting, Sena Agbeko. So Sena Agbeko was last seen against David Morrell. If you recall that fight where David Morrell ended up stopping Sena Agbeko. Osleis Iglesias did the same. He stops him in the second round. Osleis Iglesias looked good. Another Cuban fighter who I was mentioning in past episodes that I would love to see David Morrell fight Osleis Iglesias in a big Cuban showdown. Very similar styles from both fighters. That would surely be an all-action fight. Just bombs away for those two. So we might not have to look too far as it relates to Mbili's next opponent, because he might as well, in my opinion, he might have very well been on that undercard, and we could definitely see Mbilli and Osleis Iglesias next. Main event and co-main event winners. That would be a fun fight. Osleis has a huge amateur background, just like David Morrell did, and could pose a lot of problems to Mbilli because he's a fast fighter with long range and really good punch selection and a good counterpuncher that could pose a lot of problems to Mbili's come forward style. So we might not have to look that far, but I know what the plan is, obviously, and we're all seeing it. The big plan is to get Mbilli into a big mega showdown. And if it's not a Canelo, which I don't think any of us believe it will be, don't be surprised if it does end up being a Jaime Munguia or an Eric Bazinian, whoever wins that fight, and possibly maybe by December to close out the calendar year. A mid-December showdown for those two, since they're just performing weeks apart from one another. That's going to be a very interesting fight for Munguia and Bazinian. Munguia by far is going to be the toughest test for Eric Bazinian. And Bazinian's going to be a tough test for Munguia's bounce back fight after his first defeat. A lot of holes that were exposed on that Canelo fight for Jaime Munguia. Now returning to his former trainer and Eric Morales, we'll see how he fixes the defense. We'll see how he fixes the holes. Remember, he was dropped by Canelo early in the fight. And many believe that he should have been stopped in that fight, but that Canelo carried him all the way through to the end. Which could definitely mess with Jaime Munguia's psyche. If that was the case. He felt it. He was in there. And if that was the case, you know that's got to play a role in Munguia. So we don't know what version of Jaime Munguia we'll see in September. So really, really interesting. The one that I'm so curious about right now is the fact that the Bully has not had an opponent and doesn't have any announcement for a return date yet. And he's a big player in the 168-pound division. We'll see how everything continues to play out. And somebody else that was on this undercard was Abdullah Mason. Once again, successful. Gets the stoppage win over Mike Owen Jr. in the second round. In the 135-pound division, as live as ever. Keyshawn Davis, Floyd Schofield, the top four being Tank, Loma, Baranchik, Shakur. You got Camarón Cepeda, Alan Garcia, Kid Kansas. You have Emiliano Vargas, who I'm not sure if he's still at 135 or if he's completely moving up to 140. That's a stacked division. Who else am I forgetting? Kermel Moten is one of the new guys that's making a lot of noise. Floyd Mayweather's protege. You still have Frank Martin in there. I think Frank Martin's going to be moving up to 140, though, if I recall reading that. A lot of live dogs at 135, and Abdullah Mason is just carving his own path. And we are just one or two fights away from seeing all of these guys start getting in the ring with one another. Kermel Moten and Abdullah Mason would be the fight that I would like to see. Floyd Schofield, Keyshawn Davis. Or maybe Floyd Schofield and Alan Garcia, and then Keyshawn Davis, Andy Cruz. You have Murataya, who's still there. I would like to see him against Cepeda. I think Cepeda would be favorite for me, and he would probably derail Murataya, who hasn't looked as dominant in his last two showings, the most recent against Tevin Farmer. A lot of big fights to be made at 135. Abdullah Mason comes out with the victory. Osles Iglesias starting to become a big player at 168. Doesn't have a lot of push behind him yet, but this was a big showing by him on his behalf. And I hope we see him with a bigger name on his next outing. So Christian Mbilli, successful. Derevyanchenko on the back end of his career. It sucks that he got injured because I feel that Derevyanchenko with both arms, a fully functioning Derevyanchenko, this fight would have played out completely different. And he is so tough that he still made this into a rough, lengthy fight against Mbilli. And that's what makes me doubt Mbilli a little bit right now, because at least as far as the hype that they're pushing him as if he's the next big thing at 168, And he is really good. He's a really good fighter and a really fun fighter to watch. But Derevyanchenko with one arm generated a lot more questions about Mbilli and his full arsenal and talent or abilities. Derevyanchenko generated more questions about Mbilli than Mbilli provided answers. This should have been an Mbilli performance where he notices that he has an injured fighter in front of him and he eliminates him. But he couldn't find the way to close the show. And instead, he ends up getting injured. He ends up injuring one of his shoulders, I believe, as well, en route to a decision win. All in all, Mbilli passes the toughest test of his career, gets the nod, and is now going to sit and wait. I don't think he'll get the CANELO sweepstakes, but who knows? Look, Berlanga landed it, so who knows? What do we know? Money's talking at the moment. But I really feel that we'll be seeing Mbilli and the winner of Munguia-Bazinian. Seems to be the most obvious right now route, being that Munguia just joined Top Rank, forces with Top Rank. Seems like that's going to be the most obvious route. And if Munguia is unsuccessful, we'll definitely see a big Canadian showdown between Mbilli and Bazinian. French-Canadian showdown. So I'll leave you guys with that. I'm really curious to hear about what you guys thought about his performance, what you guys think about Mbilli going forward, and who you guys think should be his next opponent. Also, let's start a quick discussion here and let me know how you guys see the landscape playing out, being that Canelo's looking for those mega fights or those money fights. He's eventually going to vacate. He's eventually going to leave and retire. And then it's going to be wide open. Who do you guys think will be taking the throne? Because you still have a lot of opponents. Munguia has a defeat to Canelo. Caleb Plant has a defeat to Canelo. Benavidez has since moved up. Morrell has since moved up. So now you have all these other guys that are starting to line themselves up. Derevyanchenko being an older fighter now. You got the Bully, who's still young in his prime, and you got everybody else that's lining themselves up. Diego Pacheco, should he be successful over Maciej Sulecki, you're going to be paying a lot more attention to what Diego Pacheco is going to do. So everybody's starting to line themselves up, and then everybody's pretty much overlooking Berlanga, as am I. He's got a puncher's chance. He's a heavy hitter himself. He's got a puncher's chance. You never know how everything plays out. But stylistically, this is a really easy fight for Canelo, the Berlanga fight. So I'm really curious to see how you guys see the landscape playing out post Canelo within the 168 division. So I'll leave you guys with that. Thank you guys again for tuning in, for continuing to share the episodes, for continuing to follow along and download. Regardless of which podcast platform happens to be your favorite. I have the show pretty much out there on every major platform available for you, and big things coming. I got some things planned here, some things up my sleeve, and some trips that I'm going to be making, and hopefully I'll bring you some more episodes as far as interviews are concerned. Some more good interviews with some decent fighters, up and coming fighters and legends, and we'll see what I could bring you guys. But thank you guys for tuning in and for staying on top of what the show's bringing to you, and for helping me continue to grow. We'll see who opens the doors next and what event I could find myself at. And all for the purpose of bringing you guys the absolute best and genuine coverage that I can. So thank you guys again. Have yourselves a great night. And I'll catch you all on the next episode. Take care.